Good morning and welcome to our Sunday morning service. We are thrilled this morning. We have a couple of guests, and so we have Helen with us. We also have Bernie with us, and so we are very, very excited about that. Brother Bernie has decided to join us, so we are happy that he is sitting there, and if you don't get that joke, that's really too bad. Really too bad. So, moving along, Bernie's going to be following along with us for a few minutes here. We are on part 4 of our quarantine conversations, and this morning we're going to be talking about stress. I'm going to give a little bit of a recap. If you missed the previous weeks of what we're doing, if this is your first time joining and you're not really sure why the church is set up this way, this isn't what you're normally used to. We are, for the month of January, doing conversations. And so we felt like going into January, going into another lockdown, we wanted to address some of the main topics that we felt were necessary to have conversations about. So week 1, we talked about COVID and civil disobedience, specifically because our region has been a bit of a hotbed for that. And so myself and Hellen Krahn had a conversation about that. Week 2, we did Mennonite myths. And sorry, I'm so distracted by the fact that Bernie Sanders is behind us. We did Mennonite myths with Ann, and so we talked about the reality of a lot of misconceptions about what it means to be Mennonite. Speaking of misconceptions, a funny joke that Helen told me this morning that some of us may be offended by. I certainly was, but so she says, "Hey, what do you call a good-looking guy in a Mennonite church?" And I'm like, I don't know. I assumed it was a pastor, but apparently that wasn't the right answer. She's like, a visitor. Like, that hurts. That hurts right off the get-go. That hurts. So anyways, that's how my morning started out. How are you? And so we did that, and then week 3, last week, we talked about grief. This was a bit of a heavier one, and but so important. A lot of us, those of you guys who've had to do funerals during this lockdown, you understand the difficulty of grieving when a lot of the things that you normally use to grieve aren't there. We don't have the big community support. You don't have the big funeral. You don't have a lot of the normal things that we grieve. And so we talked about the importance of grief, how to grieve. So thank you so much to Jason Dykstra for showing up and doing that with us. If you haven't watched that, make sure you go back. So all that leading into today. And so I have Hellen Krahn here with us, Hellen with 2 L's. That has been mentioned several times. And so if you are making notes, it's Hellen with 2 L's. She is here, and she is a counselor through HK Counseling. She contracts a lot of her work through anxietycenter.com. And Patrick will put that post on there. And so we asked her to come in and talk about stress and anxiety. COVID has given us an extended period of stress, extended period of anxiety, and going into 2021, it is continuing. And so we want to talk about dealing with it. How do we deal with it? Can you gain victory over it? How do we navigate that? So with that, before we get going into all the questions and you give us all your insight and wisdom, tell us a little bit about yourself. Who are you? How'd you end up here? How'd you end up doing what you're doing?
So I'm Hellen with 2 L's, yes. And those of you that were wondering, yes, I am related to that other Krahn that you had here earlier in the month. I don't know if you guys can handle 2 Krahns in 1 month. Michael is my eldest nephew. I've lived all my adult life in Chilliwack, British Columbia, and I moved back to Ontario 6 years ago to be here closer to my mom as she was aging, and she actually passed away 2 weeks into COVID lockdown. And so, yeah, we know all about...
Mic change?
Mic change? Mm-hmm. Uh-oh, I'm in trouble.
Is it turned on? Are we on?
Are we on? Okay. So yeah, we lost my mom 2 weeks into the pandemic, and so originally my plan was to move back to the coast, but we'll see what happens. Pandemic stuff will keep you here for the time being. A little bit about who I am inside of a counselor. I love exploring the outdoors, and I love taking photographs. Any of you that are on my social media know that I post photos of the things that I see. And Southwestern Ontario has a lot of cool little places to explore.
Yep.
How I got into this, according to pandemic numbers, I'm part of the elderly, so as an elderly person, it's hard for me to go back and think about how I got into this, but I remember working at a nursing home and thinking it was nursing I wanted when I was in high school, and then I worked at a summer camp and saw social workers and realized it wasn't all the giving meds and dealing with people's sicknesses, but it was more
the being there for people. And so I went and did my degree when I was a little bit older. So I got my master's degree, as you said, in counseling, and I've been in private practice since 1995. And then I've been with Anxiety Centre, Canadian spelling of Centre, CENTRE, since 2009. And I'm very blessed to be part of that team. When I started, we were a smaller group, and I have 16 colleagues now. And we work via Skype and phone all over the world. So I have clients worldwide.
Okay.
And all of us there have our bios as well, because most of our clients find it helpful to know that we too I've healed from my anxiety and depression. And so you'll see all of our stories there. So if any of you ever wanted to go for counseling there, check out myself and my colleagues' bios to see who you might find to be the best fit for you.
Okay, awesome. Hey, sorry, we had some tech difficulties. I think we are all perfectly back up and running.
Are we good now?
Thank you, tech team. We had Bernie Sanders here, and apparently he messed everything up. So I don't know if that's a Democratic joke. No, too soon? Okay.
Although I feel like I should sing if I'm holding this, but.
So let's dive right into it. Anxiety is stress. So over the last couple of years, we've had a lot more conversations about mental health, and I think it's been really good. We talked about that last week already, that we're starting to at least talk about this, because so much of who we become, the decisions we're making, and even our ability to be healthy depends on our mental health. And so anxiety, stress, we've talked about this, but there's still a lot we don't know. And I learned this firsthand. I was talking with her when she came in this week to kind of start going over this. There's a lot I don't know. And so a few times she was like, no, Albert, that's not actually the way it goes. So I've been corrected a few times this week, which is good, because there's so much to learn. But one of the first things, as this goes, we throw all these words out. What's the difference between your normal anxiety, because all of us to some degree have anxiety and stress, and having a condition where you should consider going to see a doctor and seeking help? Like, how do you differentiate those things?
So I want to just give a little bit of a caveat here. I just want to make sure that I don't leave any of you with the impression that it's a quick fix and that it's easy if you have developed an anxiety condition. It takes time to heal and to address underlying factors that led you to developing an anxiety condition in the first place. But with the help of, we have a lot of good information at Anxiety Centre. Jim, who owns the site along with his wife Marilyn, is very good at keeping up on the latest scientific research, and a lot of good information there. So along with a good counselor, and myself and my colleagues would be happy to help any of you if we have openings. If not, you can go on a waiting list of whoever you'd like to be with. So I just wanted to make sure that to let you know that we're going to be talking about some tools, but it's not a quick fix. It takes time to deal with an anxiety condition, but it can be done. So all of us deal with a certain amount of stress and anxiety. And can I have the stress slide up there, please? Sometimes we define stress a little too narrowly, so there's a number of sources of stress, and it is important to identify them. And you'll see if you look at this list that there's a lot you can do for your stress not to get as high. So stress can be emotional, mechanical, physical, nutritional, environmental, chemical, and as a result of radiation. It can also be both internal and external. So examples of internal stress include low or high blood sugar, ingesting caffeine, drug abuse, strenuous exercise, pain, illness, and the like. And even with illness and pain, you can't control whether you get a broken arm or that type of thing, but you can still control how fast it heals by relaxing and doing all of these things we're going to talk about in a minute here. But and then examples of external stress include the environment that we live and work in, and also how we perceive interactions with people, situations, and life events as experienced through our thoughts and emotions. So there again, you can see we have a lot of control over our stress by our perception. So sometimes it might feel more stressful because our perception is skewed based on past experience. So that's stress. And then feeling anxious in general, like I said, all of us feel a certain amount of stress and anxiety, and feeling anxious or fearful is part of the body's survival mechanism. It's doing its job to keep us safe. It will alert you to maybe some danger ahead, and then it will help you, it motivates us to take appropriate action, whether we run out of there or whether we fight. I always think a bear in the woods example, right? If I've gone hiking with friends in BC whose husbands are hunters, they're pretty relaxed if we see bear poop on our walking trail, and I'm kind of like, I'd run out of here if they weren't with me, but they've learned animal behavior, and they know when they need to be nervous and when not. So that's just in general. All of us can feel anxious at times, but it motivates us to do something to be safe. But it becomes an anxiety condition when we become afraid of anxiety, of the sensations that you feel through anxiety, and the symptoms that we end up feeling, and where we think that those symptoms might lead us. And so that's when it becomes an anxiety condition. And so we, at Anxiety Center, we say that anxiety is a condition of overstimulation and fear, and that anxiety is a behavioral condition. And so we're going to talk a little bit about all three of those.
Okay. So I was thinking, if I was walking through the woods in BC, like what am I looking for bear poop? Because I feel like I wouldn't even be anxious, because I don't even know. I have no idea.
Well, if you Google bear poop, you will see.
I'm not Googling bear poop.
If you Google poop of various wild animals, you can see.
All right, so let's jump into this then, because a lot of us, especially sorry, you want to continue?
Yeah, there's actually something before, and you were going to tell me what you were surprised by. But so, so first of all, picture this glass. I tried to get a clear glass so that you could see that there's half water in it, but we didn't have one. But this glass is half full. So when you are maintaining balance, when you're maintaining equilibrium in your brain, in your body, and your nervous system, your glass is half full. So then, if you get some extra stress, you've still got some room in there. Okay. And then you can regain equilibrium fairly easily. But if you're living pretty high stress, like a hectic lifestyle, and if you're an anxious thinker, then your glass is full. And so then any little extra stress, there's overflow. And the overflow, that's the symptoms. And now, before any of you that are watching go and Google symptoms at Anxiety Center, which I know a lot of you might do, I want you to listen first, because your symptoms are actually your friends. Definitely go and check it out with a doctor to make sure that it isn't something else. But if your doctor has given you a clean bill of health, then you can know that those symptoms are symptoms of overstimulation. And going back to, they're actually your friends, because they're letting you know that you're overworking the body in some way, and that you need to take proactive action to stop overworking the body. So I always use the example of a dashboard lights on your car. So when the dashboard lights go off, do you freak out and sit there and freak out and wonder what they're doing, or what do you do?
Just keep driving.
Albert would just keep driving. I would suggest that you follow through. If it's telling you your door is not quite closed, you close it. If it says need to get gas, you get gas. If it's something that you don't know what to do with, then definitely you take it to a mechanic, right? And so you let the mechanic fix it for you. And so that's what your symptoms are. They're your friends. They're just letting you know. If medical has said that you're fine, and then that's what they're doing. They're letting you know.
Okay. In my defense, I wasn't sure where you were going with that. I would drive, I don't know, pull over, swerve right. No, that makes perfect sense. And I think in a lot of us, again, kind of going back to the bear poop a little bit and connecting some of this, you have to be aware of yourself and where you're running at to be able to understand some of this. And I think we've talked about this often as a church, is the busy factor in our lives and the lack of reflection has led us down some paths where you don't even realize how busy you are. You don't even realize how stressed you are. Yeah. So getting to a place of self-awareness, and I think that kind of transitions us to this first part.
Actually, I just need to go back again. My apologies. I told you I'm not a detail person. If you can put up the common anxiety symptoms. So here's some common symptoms, and there's an extensive list at Anxiety Center. There's a couple hundred of them. And so really and truly, if you haven't found anything medically, these symptoms are symptoms of overstimulation. So there's things like heart palpitations, chest pain, shooting chest pains, asthma and anxiety, chronic pain, trembling and shaking. You can see some of those that are up on the screen there. And as I said, there's an extensive list at anxietycenter.com. There, now you can go.
Now I can go. We're good now, you're sure?
All right.
Now. So when she was here on Thursday, we were talking about this. One of the first things you talked about is physical self-care. Now, we know self-care matters, sort of, but with some of this, I don't think you ever connect some of that. And so I want to talk a little bit about, why does that matter so much? What are some of the things that we can do, and how does that kind of affect your stress and anxiety?
And so, you're not unlike a lot of people when they first come to us. They're thinking we're going to delve into all of the stuff they're struggling with, and so they're surprised when the first thing we talk about is physiological symptoms and how to take care of them. So there's a lot of natural things that you can do to bring the glass back to half full and to regain your equilibrium. And so applying them consistently, eventually those symptoms will go away. And again, it's not a quick fix, depending on how overstimulated you've gotten and for how long. But you should see, if you apply those strategies very carefully, especially the first 3 or 4 months, you're going to see a significant drop in your symptoms. And eventually they will all go away. A few of them linger, like Jim at the Anxiety Center talks about. I think for him it was dizziness that lasted a long time, even though. But the good thing is, once you realize they're your friends, if you react to them with fear, that continues the stress cycle, right? Ooh, I got a symptom, I'm scared, what is it? So the key is not to be afraid of them, to just let them float by. And it's not that they feel comfortable, but they're going to be there for a while, and just passively accepting them and being calm about them being there is a big part of helping you to heal. And so that's why we start with the physiological strategies to help you regain your equilibrium, and so that your body isn't living with so many stress hormones in it. So stress hormones are stimulants, and so some of what you will see, when I say what you will see is, again, if you want more information at the membership part of the site, in Chapter 4, we will have all of them spelled out. I'm just going to give you a little bit of a synopsis of some of them. But what you will see in Chapter 4, there is all of them spelled out for you and why we ask you to do them. But part of it is stimulants, right? So when you're already overstimulated, we don't want coffee, we don't want coffee, we don't... we talk about alcohol, we talk about sugar, those types of things, and then we also talk about blood sugar levels, right? Because if you're not eating regularly, or your blood sugar is dropping, or whatever, that also creates some stress. And so some of these strategies there because of that. And then a really key thing is rest and relaxation is the antidote. And so we encourage you to do a 20-minute cat nap somewhere in your day, and to do a 20-minute meditation, which just really means deep relaxation somewhere else in your day, to have a hobby that relaxes you. And that's not exercise. We do encourage mild to moderate exercise each day while you're healing. But to have a hobby, all of these rest and relaxation things, they're really important part. They're the antidote. And that's where some of your values and beliefs come in, because a lot of people, now I'm sure it's no Mennonites, but who think that relaxing and if to go for a nap during the day would be lazy, right? And so sometimes there's resistance to that. And also if you've been through trauma in the past, it can be scary to relax, because they have to be aware. So it's not like this is, for some people it takes a little bit to learn to relax their body.
Right.
And so, but yeah.
So, because I don't really like exercise per se, would you consider Krispy Kreme to be part of physical self-care?
Raising it to your mouth regularly.
Is that's still okay? Josie made me cinnamon buns yesterday for our physical self-care, so it's been really good. So one of the things that I like about this, in talking with Hellen, and she'll keep pointing back to anxietycenter.com, because there's so much more than we can cover in an hour. One of the things that I really like about it is the fact that she kept saying, no, Albert, you can get over this stuff, or you can deal with it well. And one of my experiences, at least in talking with people as a pastor, because I don't have all these tools. Part of why we think the church needs to work together well is because you need the different tools and different expertise. But there's a lot of people I know that have struggled with stress and anxiety at very high levels for extended periods of time. And talking with you, that's been one of the big encouragements coming out of this, and why I really felt we needed to do this, was that no, you don't have to stay in that place, but then you also have to do the work. And I think part of what holds people back is the stigma, beer,
which you're not doing while you're
apparently you know where my mind is at. There's a stigma, but there's also the fear of this can be a waste of time. Counseling is a waste of time. There's a lot of that kind of misconceptions out there, but there's hope. And for a lot of you guys who are struggling with anxiety or struggling with stress, one of the big things I want to get across today, because in an hour like this where you're getting so much, maybe the perfect answer isn't here, but that there is hope. And you don't have to live under that incredible stress and anxiety. And maybe you can never get to a point where it all disappears perfectly, but we can move in the direction of finding more peace. And for those of us who are followers of Jesus, we believe that God plays a big part in that. And one of the fruits of the Spirit is peace. One of the things that God wants to do in our lives is give us that. And so I'd really encourage you, wherever you're at with this, my hope this morning is that you encouraged to try to get to a better place, to feel less stress, less anxiety, to move to a place of better health. And I know this is a tough time to even have this conversation because we're stuck in lockdown again. And if you're a parent, the way I'm a parent, we got kids at home and you're worried about the effect that this is going to have on them. But don't be discouraged by that alone. And we're going to get to circumstances a bit later, but sometimes we can just get to a place to go, this can't get better, and it can. And maybe it'll cost some finances. You've talked about the membership. You've talked about
the
going through
membership
that.
really isn't very costly. We charge in US dollars, and I think it's about $60 for a full year. And there's a lot of good reading there. We're going to explain to you what your body is doing, and people find that very helpful. We're going to explain what the brain is doing, and people find that helpful. There's a whole chapter on sleep, because a lot of people have sleep difficulty.
Yep.
There's chapters on what to do with your brain and with your mind and with your body, as we've already talked about.
Yeah, so lots of good stuff.
Yeah.
So with that, let me dive into the second thing. You talked about a decision intersection.
Yeah, so we talked about the overstimulation. As I said, anxiety is a condition of overstimulation and fear, and it's a behavioral disorder. So we'll talk about behavioral disorder. We'll talk about fear and that a little bit later. But so as far as behavior, so you talked about the fruits of the Spirit. Another fruit of the Spirit is self-control. And we know so much more about the brain now, and we know that we can retrain the brain. And so if you can put up the decision intersection. So if you think of an event, thought, circumstance, or challenge as a little fire that's coming at you, so you have a choice. You'll see a stop sign there. So you have a choice to stop for a moment, but you can put fuel and gas on it by behaving with stress and anxiety and crisis living and worry and fretfulness and imagining the worst and being nervous. That's going to produce the stress response that stimulates the nervous system in the body. Or you can deep breathe, calm yourself, put water on that little fire by looking at the situation from the water side with peace and calm and accepting what's going on, praying if you're a praying person, and imagining the best and being confident that you'll come to a good solution. That produces the rest response that calms and heals the nervous system and the body. And it may not feel like a choice at first. If you've got learned behavior that takes you to the left side, your brain automatically goes there because you've built a really good neural network that automatically goes there. It's kind of like those intuitive files on your computer, right? The ones that you use all the time, they pull up. But the less you use those intuitive files, the less that pulls up and a new one will begin to pull up. And so at whatever point you realize, ooh, I'm on the fuel and gas side, deep breathe, calm, move yourself to the water side and use those behaviors. If you've been on the fuel and gas side for a while, you might have kicked in the more potent stress hormones. So there's mild stress hormones, adrenaline and noradrenaline, and those are easy for the body to break down. And then the second stage fear brings in the cortisol, which takes the body longer to break down. And so the key is to try to put the brakes on and go over to the water side at stage 1. But if you've been on the fuel and gas side and you have cortisol, you'll still feel kind of yucky as your body breaks down the cortisol when you're on the water side. So just again, ride through it, passive acceptance and calm, and as your body breaks it down, but still use the behavior on that side to look at your situation. Then the other thing, a lot of people think of anxiety as something that comes at them. They'll talk about having an anxiety attack out of the blue. Can you put up the behavior disorder chart? I have my servants over there that are doing my bidding. So if you look, it's actually backwards. So at the end result there is anxiety and depression to the right. But if you have life experiences with challenges and you have learned behavior, worry is over on the wrong column. Worry should actually be under learned behaviors, not resulting thoughts and emotions. But so there's learned behaviors like being a people pleaser, being over responsible, high expectations, perfectionism, being hurried, feeling incapable. You'll see a lot more there, but those are the behaviors that result in the thoughts and emotions that produce the stress response that leads to behavioral disorders like anxiety and depression. And so when you're feeling anxious, it's about going back to column 1. The situation I just went through or that I'm looking to doing tomorrow or in the week ahead, what's the behavior that I'm using? And so then, I always think it's exciting because it's a learned behavior means you can unlearn it and learn new behavior. And not to say that it's easy, it takes some time. But so if you identify what the behavior is, then you can look on the bottom half of this chart to have a behavior that is from the bottom half. That's going to give you emotions like calm and peaceful and self-assured. And a calm response is that it's going to keep the body balanced and healthy.
So let me break it down a little bit for you. or ask a few more questions here. So how do you get there? So I get the idea. So the little piece of fire comes at you and you don't want to put gas on it. I'm a firefighter, so I know that much. You put the wet stuff on the wet stuff. So how do you get there though? Because a lot of us, you have these, you say the files that you go to all the time. You have these ruts that whenever I face this situation, and you talked about deep breathing, that kind of stuff, but give me some ideas that you can use if you're finding a situation where you're always high stress. Every time this happens, what are some of the things that you can do to begin to move yourself towards the water side? Because if we could, we would. Most of us hate being stressed. So,
well, but if we could, we would, but we could. That's a big part to begin to realize. People feel like it just happens automatically. So to begin to realize that you have a choice. I have a choice in this. I can choose which way I behave. And so the thing, often when you first learn, we call it containing your thoughts and emotions. So often when we're doing it reactively, right? Something happened yesterday, and so I'm going to figure out, okay, how come I reacted there? We call it containment, where you figure that out. And it's a bit long for what we're doing today, but where you take a look at, I responded this way, how would I like to respond differently next time? And you don't have to figure out all the whys and wherefores why you did that in order for your behavior to begin to change. Down the road, we will definitely look at, with clients, at underlying behaviors and beliefs and things. Beliefs, values, and attitudes. We look at our world through that. We call it our personal operating system. We look at our world through our beliefs, values, and attitudes. That's why two people can look at the same thing and see it differently, because their beliefs, their values, and their attitudes are different. Attitudes are easy to change, and we'll change them lots of time throughout the day. Values are a little bit harder to change, but not impossible. And beliefs, which are often developed when we're very young by the people that raised us and what we're observing, they can be pretty hard to change, but not impossible. And so part of that is beginning to look at that. But another key thing is, a lot of people with anxiety go by their emotions a lot. And so the important thing to recognize is that feelings aren't fact. And so you always want to check your feelings against the facts. And so stopping a little bit and looking at, is this actually, and that's part of containment. We're going to take a look at this thing that I'm telling myself, is it a fact? And the other thing people think is that that situation, that event, thought, or circumstance or challenge is what gives me the emotions. But it's actually not. There's something in between that. So if you look at a column, here you have event, here you have emotions. In between there is the meaning that we give that event. So what's my perception, what's my assumption, what's my belief, and so it's about looking at what meaning I'm giving it, and then if my meaning is skewed, if my perception is skewed, then I need to change that and give myself a new statement and keep telling myself the facts until my feelings match.
So then let's talk, the next thing we talked about was constructive and destructive worry. We talked about that a bit. Can you kind of talk about the difference between the two?
So think for a moment, those of you who are worriers, think for a moment about why you worry. What do you hope to achieve by your worrying? So think about that for a second. We'll have a minute of silence here. No.
I'll sing a little bit if you need.
Sing a little bit. Dun, dun, dun. Okay, so most of us worry. Oh, that wasn't a minute, sorry. Did you want to say?
No, that's fine. No, that's cool. Whatever. That was going to be my big break, but you go ahead. You take it. You're the star.
So most worriers tend to worry to prevent the worst from occurring and to be prepared if it does. So basically, it's like going to a card reader or whatever. What do you call those when you go for that try to tell you the future? So basically, we're trying to tell the future, and so that we don't get too surprised by what happens when something happens. And that's why we worry. And so, but the key thing to know is that when we imagine the future in its worst case terms, because the brain can't differentiate between what we think and what's actually happening, it's giving us stress hormones to deal with it. So all of those what if things that you're thinking about the future, you're getting a bunch of stress hormones. Your fear center of your brain is saying, whoa, she's got a lot of stuff going on, or he needs stress hormones. And so we really want to be careful of all the what ifs that we image to the brain, because it's going to give us a lot of stress hormones. The fear center doesn't stop to think, is this actually happening or not? But in the prefrontal cortex of the brain, we have a lot of, that's where we can put the brakes on and tell the amygdala is your fear center. One of my colleagues calls them Albert's like, One of my colleagues at Anxiety Center calls the amygdala Amy, so we affectionately call her Amy. And so the prefrontal cortex of the brain can say, whoa, Amy, this isn't really even something that's about to happen. So there's way more than you wanted to know, but a lot of people like to know that information.
No, and you know what? It's so good because if you can understand why you're responding in a way, it really helps you out. Because the what ifs, because to a certain degree you have to have the what ifs. Because that's how you make decisions. You're gonna.
Yes.
Well, then why don't we then?
Let's talk about
do
that.
All right,
let's go to the next. Okay, so because worry is a habit, I'm sure none of you have ever had bad habits. This is.
Cheers.
But those very few out there that have had bad habits, so if you ever quit biting your nails, or you quit smoking, or you quit whatever you've quit, and you've replaced it with something else, right? I've sometimes seen smokers, instead of going out for their cigarette, they might go and chat with somebody and have a candy or whatever. Not that you want to do sugars, because that's another thing you want to avoid to get over. But anyway, so worry is a habit, and so similar to other habits, we can unlearn that behavior and learn new behavior. And it might feel impossible at first, but it is possible. And one thing I just thought of too is that so often you hear mothers worry about their children regardless of how old they get. That's just normal. That's just natural. So just put that in there. We talked the other day about scripture, right? 2 Corinthians 10 verse 5 says to take every thought captive in obedience to Christ. And a lot of people are like, well, yeah, I'd like to, but I don't know how. And we also talked about that it's kind of a military analogy, taking something captive. In order to take something captive, you kind of need to observe it and to see what their actions are and to what counteractions will I have. And so a lot of times we try to get rid of worry by pushing it away, right? I don't want to worry, I'm going to want to worry. Suppressing your emotions is one of the things on the list of behaviors that are going to create anxiety and depression. So we want to let them surface. And so that's where I'm going to give you the worry strategy. So if you're taking notes, so to unlearn destructive worry and learn constructive action or worry, first of all, most of our worries never come true.
Right.
Most of our worries never come true, and even those ones that do, we deal with them better than we think we're going to. And so the first stage is decide on what time of day you're going to sit and journal and write about these things. Try to find a time that's you can consistently keep so that you won't be not doing it regularly. And then you can call that your constructive action time, you can call it your worry time, you can call it whatever you want, and not too close to bedtime, because it's not good to associate going to bed with worry.
Write out all your worst fears and then go to sleep.
Some people do it first thing in the morning, or some people do it right after work, but at whatever time. So that's the first step. Make sure you have that time. And then next, get a little notepad that you carry with you. You guys can put it in your man purse. The rest of us will put it in our... No. And a lot of
jokes today.
a lot of people, now we've got notes on our cell phone, right? So even there. So get a little notepad. Every time you worry, quickly put it on the notepad. Write down just very briefly what your worry is. And then, because we want to start becoming aware of our worry habit and how often we worry and where we worry and that. And so you're going to quickly write it down. We don't have to do it quickly because we want to learn not to live a hectic lifestyle, but just write it down. And then the next step is then send it to your constructive action time. Right now is not the time to worry about it. You have better things to do, to taste, to touch, to hear, to see, to smell, to pay attention to who's right in front of you. So send it to your constructive action time. And of course, you've given your mind control. You've let it know it's the boss, and so it's going to try to come right back in your thoughts again right off the bat. So each time it does, just keep sending it back, reminding yourself that you have better things to do right now. And eventually, you will master your thoughts and emotions versus letting them master you. And you're going to come to a much better conclusion if you do it during your constructive action time than right now when you have other things to do. So keep sending it there.
Well, what I like about that is, for me at least, I think I have something clear in my head until you try to write it out on paper, and I think it helps your brain process it.
Yeah.
And I think that'd be something that's really neat. I've never thought of that before, is every time you worry, you write that down, and then you can kind of begin to process, okay, these are my worries. And then I think even with figuring out the initial question about is this a condition versus is just normal? How often is this happening? Well, if you don't ever write it down, you're kind of just guessing, right?
Yeah.
So no, that's really good.
And
That's
some people
great
are
stuff.
much more numbers persons. I know some people write down a lot of numbers of these things, and I tend to be more a big picture person, and so I don't necessarily do the numbers, but whatever works for you, right? How often am I worrying? But so if you're worrying every time you get in the car and going somewhere, then your brain's like, ooh, worry time, let's dig up all the worries. And so you're going to have to reframe what you do when you get in the car, right? Put on some gentle music, notice, what the scenery as you're driving by. Make sure that you have your mind focused on the now, right? It's not the time to go and do all that. So you're going to retrain your brain. You're schmooster.
I know, I'm sorry. We were talking about, she likes jazz music, so I was thinking of the soft music. And all of a sudden it came out that she was listening to a lot of AC/DC. And so we were trying to balance this morning. Is that a new form of rock
do not
jazz?
listen
jazz
to
rock?
AC/DC.
What is happening here? So
I do not.
sorry, that was I couldn't stop. It was funny.
I do not listen to AC/DC.
Anymore.
But I was the first one in my family to listen to that hard rock Detroit station when I was a teenager. But I've since repented, kind of.
Sort of.
Not really.
All right,
But.
let's move on.
Okay, so I'm ahead on my notes. Okay, so you're sending it to your journaling time. And the ideal is to journal the stuff that's happening tomorrow and the week ahead, but the reality is a lot of times we're cleaning out the junk that just happened today. But even retroactively, if I look at that situation that just happened, I can retrain the brain for how I will begin to do it and respond to it the next time it happens. So regardless, clean out things that happened in the past and then look at the ahead and look at what's happening. And so if you've learned to worry, say 18 hours a day, if you're noticing you're worrying throughout, look at how much stress time you're freeing up by doing it just that half an hour to an hour during your journaling time. And the rest of the time you're going to live in the moment. Doesn't mean it's going to be all joyful in the moment.
Sure.
Life is about joy and pain. All of that is natural human emotion. But that you won't be sending out so many stress signals because of all of your worrying. So, and I said something the other day which you liked, is that worriers tend to live in the future with all the what ifs, and they miss out on the moment, right? Like some people are really worried about what happens to my kids if I go, and in the meantime they're missing out enjoying their kids right now.
Right.
And so destructive worriers tend to live in the future, always thinking on the what ifs. Constructive worry or constructive action means plan for the future, then live in the moment. So it's not that we want to ignore the stuff that's going on. We want to take a look at it. So now you're at your journaling and constructive action time, whether you chose it in the morning or right after work. So take out that list that you made throughout the day, put it into 2 columns. One column is the things that you can't do anything about. The other column is the things you can do something about. Those things that you can't do anything about, you want to release them to God. So the Serenity Prayer, I don't know if any of you are familiar with the Serenity Prayer. It became very popular with a lot of the recovery groups like Alcoholics Anonymous. That's a really great prayer for your worry time. The Serenity Prayer says, God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. So column 1 is the first part of that prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. So every time that thought comes up again, when you've realized I can't do anything about it, I'm going to give it to him. The second column is the courage to change the things I can. And the rest of the plan is we're going to be talking about that column. But before we go to that, when we're thinking about what we can control and what we can't, can I have that slide up about COVID, what we can control? And I think you said Michael talked about this a little bit.
Yeah, he talked about it a bit. I want to go back a little bit. You can put the slide up. Or no, put the slide up. That's good. But one of the things that I was thinking about as you were writing it out too, another great counselor, Andrew Lucas, that I know and really appreciate, talks about an emotions key and actually being able to articulate what you're actually feeling.
Yeah.
Because in the same way we say the word worry or stress, we kind of do that with anger too. We have this blanket term, but it's not necessarily anger. Maybe you're feeling betrayed. Maybe you're feeling fearful, whatever you're feeling, but actually articulating that.
And even knowing what you feel, that's a whole nother, right. I mean, I could come back and do another whole hour on that, because a lot of us in our culture, we're never taught to feel our feelings. And we don't know that. I remember when I was learning to feel, I didn't know that they start as a sensation in my body. And so some with anxiety condition can also get scared of the sensations, not knowing that it's a feeling. Like, I'm supposed to feel this when I'm feeling hurt. I'm supposed to feel this when I'm feeling scared. And so just that sensations and then learning to express them is very important. And it is important. All of our feelings are God-given, and they are important to express and to learn how to deal with them. So yeah, that also takes practice and teaching to be able to do that. Yeah, very good point. Thank you. I had wanted to bring that up anyway.
Right.
Yeah, great minds think alike.
Great minds, right? I mean,
But yeah, there's lots of teaching on that. I do a lot of teaching of my clients to how to feel real feelings, right? They've learned to be reactive and feel fear or maybe just anger and nothing beyond that. And so, yeah, very important.
I was going to try to show that I was listening to you, and I was going to say which part of the brain I used to recall that, but I have no idea. So I'm going to say I used Annie. I have no idea.
Amy.
Amy. I don't even know.
You can use Annie if you want, but she's not
All
there.
right, what can we control? Let's go to the slide here.
Okay, so you can see in the middle there, I can control, so I will focus on these things: my positive attitude, how I follow CDC recommendations, my own social distancing, limiting social media, my turning off the news, finding fun things to do at home, my kindness and my grace. Much to many people's chagrin, they cannot control if others follow these rules,
Right.
their actions, predicting what will happen in the future. A big part of being able to deal with the anxiety of all of this is learning to live with uncertainty. There's always uncertainty in life, and so that's a big part of overcoming stress as well, is knowing, you know what, life can be uncertain. I'm going to learn to be comfortable with it. Not that we like it, but learn to be comfortable with it. So the amount of toilet paper at the store, I have no control over. How long this will last and how others will react. So that's a really good picture of what I can and can't control. So the outer part of the circle, those are things we're going to release to God.
Yeah.
I can't control what others do. That's me in traffic, right? I can't control what all these others really good drivers do.
Well, so I was thinking about that this week. I had a bit of an aha moment. So I've often thought, if you guys are familiar with the Bible, if you go back to the beginning of the story of Adam and Eve, and they're allowed to do everything except for this one thing. And somehow they end up doing this one thing. And so I was thinking about, you know, as we're going through COVID, there are so many things we can do. So many things we can still do. I'm sitting at home with my plethora of kids, and there are so many moments that I could be capturing with them. I could be hanging out with them. All this, you know, before COVID, we were all too busy to do all this stuff.
Yeah.
But now you have time. My wife's picked up Lego.
Oh, cool.
Right, I know.
Did you hear that Betty White can't play with them after this year because it says they're good from $3 to $99? Sorry, go ahead.
Carry on. So I was just thinking how interesting it is that we are always so quick to focus on the one thing that we can't do. And looking back on COVID, I wonder how many people, I mean, you had time to write, you had time to read, you had time to work out if you're so inclined. You have all this time because all these extracurriculars aren't there. You had time to invest in relationships that you said you wanted, but we're so focused on that thing that we can't do.
Yeah.
Since I can't do this, everything is negative. And so it gave me a whole different perspective on Adam and Eve and that whole thing. What is it about that? And so I think...
Your mind keeps going to it.
Right.
We can't do that. Why can't we do that? I want to do that. Yeah.
And so a chart like this, I think, is so crucial in controlling our stress and controlling our anxiety. If we're trying to control what Doug Ford is going to do, like, he doesn't actually read your Facebook. Like, he doesn't actually care that much. He's going to make his own decision based on his own people, but we get so stressed about that. Control the things you can control. And I think that there's a lot of peace in that, and then give the rest to God. And I think that's one thing that sets our worldview apart specifically with this, because if there is no God, then the things you can't control are just left to whoever. And I think what makes Christianity beautiful is the belief that there's a loving and amazing God who is actually in control. And so the things I can't control, I can give over to him.
I always use the Psalms as a good example of someone being honest with their emotion. And somebody this week that I follow, a speaker, said they noticed that a lot of his Psalms, he starts with God is good. That's a given, right? I know in my head God is good, but these are the things I'm still struggling with. So he processes it through journaling and writes it all out. And often by the end of a Psalm as well, then he's again saying, this is the goodness of God that I see. But if we try to just push all those worries away, then they're sitting there, and it's hard for us to see the goodness of God because it's all this stuff in our head. So yeah, that's awesome. So now we're in your worry time. So now you've got the two columns. You're going to put the one column you're going to give to God. So back to the worry steps here. The one column you're going to keep releasing to God each time it comes up, or if you don't believe in God, you can release it to the ether. But whatever you picture yourself giving it up to wherever. And the part that you can control, that's where we're going to make a plan now. And so an example of how to do that is we're going to give a few steps here. So first of all, you want to identify the underlying threat. So often the thing we think is the fear is not what we're really fearing. Follow those what ifs through to their logical conclusion. That's your core fear. So say somebody has a health concern, their real concern when you follow it through all the what ifs might be, what if I have a prolonged illness? How will I be able to deal with what if I die? And so the thing you want to make a plan for is that core thing. So the only time you want to follow through on all those what ifs is during your journaling time, and for the purpose of hearing what's my underlying fear here, and so what do I want to make the worry plan for? And so then we're also going to look at what's the probability of this thing actually happening that I'm thinking is going to happen. And so again, don't research all over the internet, because you can get horror stories and scare yourself even more. So if it's an illness, you ask your doctor. If it's about worry and anxiety, of course, the only place out there is anxietycenter.com, CNTRE.
That's it, one place.
For good information. But anyway, to go to somebody reputable, right, to find out, and even to a friend that you know has dealt with it. So go and talk, because one of the stress reduction things is talk out your problems, express your emotions. So talk it through with someone to see what they've done, to see what you can do. If it's about finances, you might talk to a financial advisor, or talk to someone or to your bank to see what they can do to help you shuffle things to be able to deal with. So whatever your underlying fear is, if you're scared of becoming homeless or because of stuff that's happening with COVID, again, you're gonna research the probability of that happening. And then you're going to make a plan based on the probability of it happening. If the probability is very slim, you don't need to make a huge plan. If you realize, oh, this isn't actually something that's even going to happen. So you look at the steps you can take, get information that can help, talk to somebody about the reasonableness of the worry, decide on actions to take over the next few days, and even that can reduce the likelihood of it happening. Then implement the plan and revise as necessary, but then it goes into column 1. You release it. Then every time the worry comes up, you're going to release it and say, as far as I can plan, I've got it planned now. So that's it very much in a nutshell. So it's not in great detail. And again, a counselor or therapist can help you with some of that and getting in more detail. But while we're on this, so we're talking about looking at your underlying fear. And I think we have a little bit of time, right? So let's talk about fear specifically. And so fear, a baby doesn't have fear. Fear is learned. And so Marilyn at Anxiety Center uses the example of taking her little one to swimming. I think it was her story. If not, sorry, Marilyn. Taking her little one swimming, and the little one jumps in the pool and trusts that mommy's going to catch him. And so they play that game, and he loves it. And all of a sudden, one day he goes to the deep end of the pool, and he jumps in, and guess what he realizes? It's not just automatic. So that's how fear is learned. He realizes that water can be unsafe. The second part of that in dealing with fear is how you respond to it. So that mother could have freaked out and said, whoa, I'm not taking him back to water again. So then he would have ended up with fear of water. But instead, she gave him the ability to be able to deal with water. She took him for swimming lessons, and the more capable he became of swimming, and they also will teach you when water is dangerous. I think we got what is it called, an undertide at Lake Erie? No, what's it called? Undertow. Undertow. So you're
keep asking me questions, and I'm like, I'm not very smart. I'm very smart.
You have different areas of intelligence than others.
Different areas. I have special areas.
I won't comment on that. I won't comment on that. Now, where was I?
My wife and kids are commenting right now. I can tell you that much.
And Ann Siemens is commenting too, I think. Yeah, sorry. Okay, so you can either run from it and never deal with it. Another catchphrase we use for fears is face it, embrace it, erase it, replace it. The more we run from it, the bigger it feels. Yep. And I was telling you the other day, one of the key verses in my healing was 1 John 4 verse, I believe it's 18 or 19. There is no fear in love. Perfect love casts out fear. So for me, it was always in those areas where I have fear, I don't know my perfect lover well enough. And so when I walk into that fear, I can say, okay, God, where are you in this? Help me to see you in this. So then the next thing about fear, there are 3 things that need to come together in order for a fear to exist. It must seem real, certain, and imminent. It's going to be painful or uncomfortable. And the third thing is, I'm trapped, I can't do anything about it. When these 3 things come together, that's when a fear exists. But the really good thing is, you can put the brakes on. Just by putting the brake on even one of them will make the fear diminish greatly. So as soon as you feel a fear, immediately ask yourself, is this thing even real, certain, and imminent? Often you can put the brake on right there, realizing, no, you know what, this isn't even something. Is it going to be painful or uncomfortable? Yeah, it might be a little bit, but I've gone through similar or worse. I can handle that. Yep. And then the last one, is there actually nothing I can do? That's like where the worry thing can come in, right? Make the plan. What can I actually do? Yep. So my example is of needles. I used to have a big fear of needles. And I know it's because they have a hard time finding my vein. And when I was a kid, nurses would jab in there. And I remember one time she'd go get another one and then another one, and they just weren't finding my veins. And so going to give blood, right? Sometimes they find them, sometimes they don't. And so yes, number two, it's uncomfortable. But if I have a sliver, I get a sterilized needle and I put a needle in myself. And so it's no worse than that. So just rationalizing that part. And I do know there are things I can do. I can make sure I'm well hydrated. I can make sure I don't have caffeine before I go. I can make sure I bring a squeeze stress ball. And so there are things I can do. So that's the thing to know about fear, is just that you can put the brakes on so it doesn't escalate. And if you keep going with that fear, that's what will lead to panic.
Well, and as we want to wrap up here with some quotes and stuff, but that in giving blood, see, that's the kind of stuff that a person who would read instructions would know. I showed up the one time in Elmer here with a coffee, not thinking anything of it, because I figured I had some time to kill. The nurse is just like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "I don't know." And then sure enough, my blood wasn't fast enough, and I couldn't give, and I learned my lesson. But
there you go.
Again, read
the instructions when all else fails.
Or just learn the hard way, the way I do. So you introduced me to a couple of books when we were talking here, and we want to end with this one here. A book called Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl.
Yeah.
Now that'll mean nothing to most of you, because it didn't to me until you kind of explained who he was and why his story and his life is so crucial in this conversation.
Yeah, so a lot of people, you guys might have read the book Man's Search for Meaning. A lot of people seem to have to read it in college. But Viktor Frankl he died in 1997, but he was a psychiatrist, and he also was a professor. And he was in 4 different concentration camps during the Holocaust. And he developed something called logotherapy as a result of what he witnessed there. And a big part of that is, well, let me read you some of his quotes to tell his own story.
Yep.
So, number 1 here from Man's Search for Meaning: there is nothing in the world, I venture to say, that would so effectively help one to survive even the worst conditions as the knowledge that there is a meaning in one's life. There is much wisdom in the words of Nietzsche. He said, "He who has a why to live for can bear almost any how." And then the second quote: the way in which a man accepts his fate and all the suffering it entails, the way in which he takes up his cross, gives ample opportunity, even under the most difficult circumstances, to add a deeper meaning to his life. It may remain brave, dignified, and unselfish, or in the bitter fight for self-preservation, he may forget his human dignity and become no more than an animal. And here lies the chance for a man to either make use of or forego opportunities of attaining the moral values that a difficult situation may afford him. And this decides whether he is worthy of his sufferings or not. I thought that was good quotes for while we're in the pandemic, right? We can choose whether we're going to do something that blesses others or burns others, or whether we do things to the glory of God. And he says, another quote, 2 quotes. Do I have time?
Yep.
So he says, "We who lived in concentration camps can remember the men who walked through the huts, comforting others, giving away their last piece of bread. They may have been few in number, but they offer sufficient proof that everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way." And he goes on to say, "Forces beyond your control," Ford, Trudeau,
Right.
sorry, can take away everything you possess except one thing: your freedom to choose how you will respond to that situation. You cannot control what happens to you in life, but you can always control what you will feel and do about what happens to you. I thought that was a powerful quote for our COVID times, right? We can choose our attitude towards it. And so but the big thing he realized is that there were 2 groups of people in the concentration camps, and those who had meaning for suffering didn't become bitter, they became better. And that's not to say they probably didn't have times of lots of prayer and agony, but they didn't move to a lot of fear and worry and bitterness, because they chose that opportunity to grow and to love God and love. I can't say love God. Viktor Frankl does not write from a Christian perspective, but anyway, they chose to love their neighbors, and they chose to view it in a different way than they could have.
And the reason I found that very meaningful was because so often we use our circumstances to justify behavior that we know we shouldn't be doing anyway. So to use one of your weaknesses, road rage. right?
I've really
I wouldn't
grown
be
in
this
over the
way
years.
if people knew how to drive, right? And I wouldn't be so anxious if it weren't for COVID. I wouldn't be if it weren't for, and I think there's so much to this, that idea of your freedom to respond cannot be taken away from you. And I think in our world, what we've often done is we try to insulate our lives in such a way that we can't feel stressed.
Yeah.
The issue is you can never insulate enough.
Yeah.
I mean, you cannot, COVID has been a rude awakening to everybody who lives in a first world nation, that these things like this, this was like a horror movie that you'd watch 10 years ago, this disease spreading throughout the world, and we're living in it. And it didn't matter whether we were rich, and it didn't matter any of those types of things. Instead of how are we going to respond? And that's really the story that they're also going to tell. When you look at a life like this, the Holocaust, horrible, right? Beyond words.
Yeah.
But these types are the stories that will go on and on and on, because they are the ones that inspire you to find hope. That, and some of you guys are going through incredibly stressful things, and you've just recently got a diagnosis, or a family member has a diagnosis, or you have parents who are elderly and you're terrified they're going to die of this, or whatever that stress is. The thing that we have to take captive is really the way we're going to respond. And I think that's where I really loved the way you taught this and the way you explained it. And I know you keep pointing people to anxietycenter.com, but I think it's so important to have a reliable source to go to. And whatever that is, I think that was so important that you touched on that before too. We're so quick to, you just see something and you just assume it's real and you fast forward it, and that puts thoughts in, and puts stresses in. And especially with COVID, man, there's been so much that has gone around. And so not allowing the things around us to justify us missing out on what God wants to do.
Yep.
Not allowing the stressors around us to miss out on the peace that the Holy Spirit wants to give. And do and the work He wants to do through us. And so
and that's, as believers, our reframes often are claiming God's promises, right? And so there is no fear in love. There's perfect love casts out fear. 2 Timothy 1 verse 7 says He's not given us a spirit of fear, but of love and of power and of a sound mind. It depends on what version you read. And so we can and reframe some of those things is sometimes there's not a spiritual thing. It's just but often there is, as believers, to rest in God's promises is a big part of that comfort, that even though we can't see it right now, He has a plan. Awesome. And even though we don't know what's happening, God is good.
So we are going to close off. If you have any further questions, you want to talk to Hellen, you can find her all over social media. You can reach out, look her up on anxietycenter.com. You're local, you're around here. We appreciate the work you're doing, the insight you've given us. I know for me, just in the 2 conversations we've had with this, there's several things that have really helped. And I really, really appreciate that. So if you could close us off in prayer, we would appreciate that.
Yeah. And I just want to say, rather than coming to me with lots of questions, we really do have a lot of these questions answered at Anxiety Center. Jim is very good at answering readers' questions. And so in our facts or even just at Anxiety Center in general, you would find the answers there.
Awesome.
Because I do have boundaries. I don't talk to you about all this stuff whenever.
That's another topic, boundaries.
No, that's part of stress reduction.
Speaking of boundaries, we're out of time.
Okay, so we're out of time, so I'm going to pray.
Yes, please.
Father, thank you so much for how fearfully and wonderfully our bodies are made, and for how scientists keep discovering more and more and more stuff of how wonderfully it's made, and proving that what your word says, that we can choose to take every thought captive and that we can change the brain in doing so. I pray for anyone out there who needs some tools and who has had a life of anxiety and stress, for people that have had trauma. I pray that you will comfort them. I pray that you will lead them to the right resources for help. I pray that you will calm their spirits. And I thank you for that we were able to present all of this today. I thank you for who you are in our lives and how you are there to meet our needs. And we love you, Lord, and we thank you in Jesus' name.
Amen. Thanks for joining us. Hope you guys have a great week. Looking forward to next week, and we'll wrap this thing up. We'll see you.